Do you think you have cortisol face? If you have no idea what I'm talking about and you want to see a pretty crazy transformation, let's watch this video.
I think I had the worst case of cortisol face ever. I'm going to show you the picture behind me in a minute. Who is that? Excuse me, who is that? That's not me.
And it isn't just women who are talking about this either. Some men are also pointing out to cortisol as the cause of the round and puffy face. Cortisol is the body's main stress hormone, and if we're dealing with high stress over a long period of time, it can cause some prolonged high cortisol levels. When our stress hormones get thrown out of balance, there are tons of negative impacts on our health that can really affect our entire body, including our weight and body composition. As you saw in the videos I just showed you, there's a massive difference between how these creators look now and their before pictures. But is high stress and excess cortisol actually to blame? Today, I'm going to explain the truth behind cortisol face along with 5 surprising ways that stress could be sabotaging your fat loss results. Plus, I'll give you a game plan to effectively break through the weight loss plateaus caused by stress. So grab your popcorn and make sure you keep watching. Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to my humble channel. If you're new here, my name is Andres Ayesta, and I'm a registered dietitian who specializes in fat loss. I mainly work with men. Specifically, I coach a lot of dads like myself who are juggling busy careers along with their family responsibilities. So with my clients and in my own life as a dad, stress is inevitable. Let's be honest. But it's not just about negative thinking or your mindset. Stress can do a lot of damage if it goes unmanaged, including to our physical health. I've been seeing the term cortisol face all over social media for a while now because, well, of course, we need some form of term or some fancy word to explain something. So I wanted to weigh in on this and explain whether it's actually a real phenomenon that stress can change the shape of your face. Now, to understand how stress can affect your weight and your body shape, I think it's super helpful to first give you an overview of what happens to your body when you are under stress. So let's talk for a minute about how the stress response works. The stress response, which is also known as the fight or flight response, is your body's natural reaction to a perceived threat or some form of challenge. It's an ancient survival mechanism designed to help you react quickly in dangerous situations. Now, here's a simple breakdown of how it works. First, you experience something known as a trigger. This is when you encounter something that your brain recognizes as a threat. This causes the release of stress hormones, primarily cortisol and adrenaline, from your adrenal glands, which they're found and they sit on top of your kidneys. The second is when cortisol and adrenaline kick in. Adrenaline acts fast, increasing your heart rate, raising your blood pressure, and giving you a burst of energy so you can respond quickly either by fighting the threat or running away from it, which is why this is called the fight or flight response. Cortisol works a little bit slower, but it is essential for keeping you alert and focused, and it's responsible for helping you maintain your energy levels by increasing blood sugar, suppressing non-essential functions like digestion and immune function, and providing fuel for your muscles and brain to deal with the stressor. And the last stage is resolution. Once the stressor is gone, your body's supposed to calm down and cortisol levels should drop. Now, this allows your body to return to a relaxed state, often called rest and digest mode, where it can heal, digest, and restore balance. A healthy stress response is one that is activated when it's needed for survival, and it shuts off when the stress has passed. So how does this become dysfunctional? Well, we live in the 21st century, and our modern stressors are a little bit different from those that our ancestors were dealing with. In the past, stress was often short-lived and related to physical danger. I always like to use an example of running into a tiger, right? Or a snake or something that you're scared about. Like if you were living back then, once that you run into that predator or whatever it was in front of you, you definitely had that fight or flight response. Now, I'm hoping that you took on the flight response instead of like the fight. Now, when the threat has passed, your body should return to normal. Now, being able to have this temporary fight or flight response was critical for, well, our ancestors' physical survival. Now, nowadays, it's not like we're running into tigers or predators every single day, unless you live in Florida and there's alligators, but I don't think that happens as often as many people think it does. So most of our stressors aren't really direct threats to survival, and many stressors are ongoing, like work pressure and financial stress. People don't get enough downtime or recovery, which also keeps your cortisol levels high even when there's no immediate danger. So instead of being an acute response, it's a chronic response. Now, there are three main categories of stressors that we typically experience. The first one, and this is the way I explain to my clients, that stress comes in different flavors and colors. Number one is physical stressors. These are stressors that put a direct strain on your body. Like examples of physical stressors are things like injury or illness or exercise, particularly excessive, poor recovered exercise, poor nutrition, lack of sleep, exposure to extreme temperatures, and physical labor. Now, the second one is mental stressors. These often come from work demands, problem solving, decision making, and overthinking. Deadlines, job insecurity, financial worries, and having to juggle extremely busy lives are common mental stressors. And the last one is going to be emotional stressors. These are going to be involving distressing feelings and emotional experiences. When we're super angry, or when we're sad, when we're grieving, these stressors often stem from challenges in our personal relationships like family strife and breakups and different things like that. Now, in our lives, it's rare that we're just dealing with just one of these stressors at the time. Usually, it's a constant combination of all of them. And if we don't have habits in place to effectively manage our stress, your body keeps pumping out cortisol thinking you need to stay alert and prepared. So now that you have a good idea of how our cortisol system can become dysregulated, I want you to go through the 5 ways that unmanaged stress can impact your weight. Now, before we get into that, I wanted to also explain a little bit of what we call the cortisol curve. Cortisol, it's supposed to rise naturally through the day. In fact, you typically tend to have a big rise in cortisol at the beginning of the day that is actually what is getting you up in the morning. It typically tends to get down a little bit throughout the rest of the day. So when we see that the cortisol curve is a little bit off track within the normal limits of what they need to be, that's when we start to notice that there's a bit of a dysfunction in the way that your HPA axis, which is your hypothalamus, pituitary adrenal axis, which is kind of like a change that regulates that entire system. So whenever your body is overworked and it's overstressed, typically you're going to have a bit of a dysfunction in the way that actually works. So once you understand that, and there's ways to test that, by the way, but it's not necessarily something that you should go in there and run and think like, oh, if I have a cortisol face, or we're going to get into that in a second, but it's not something that you have to go and immediately do to try to figure out what is wrong with you. This is why I want to get into 5 ways that stress can be sabotaging to your fat loss results, so you can become aware of what is the kind of impact that high stress can be having in your day-to-day life and how it's affecting your fat loss results. So let's start with increased appetite and food cravings. The first thing that you may notice when you have higher cortisol levels that are a little bit elevated is you typically tend to feel hungrier. Now, the body perceives stress as a situation where you might need extra fuel, so cortisol triggers increased hunger to replenish your energy stores. Ghrelin, the main hormone that makes us feel hungry, typically increases when we're dealing with prolonged stress. At the same time, leptin, which is the hormone that signals fullness, can be disrupted in response to high cortisol, making it harder for your brain to really recognize when you've had enough to eat. So these two guys become very dysregulated. Now, it's not like you get hungry when you're in the middle of a perceived threat, like a tiger, for example, but your body's going to use up a lot of fuel to try to prepare you for something that you're not actually doing. And as a result of that, at some point, your body's going to ask for a ton of energy back. Now, the impact of fat loss, it's also because of the specific kinds of foods that you often reach when you're stressed, right? Not only does cortisol make you hungrier, but also causes you to crave high calorie, sugary, and fatty foods. These foods provide a quick source of energy, which your body really thinks it needs to deal with when in a stressful situation. Plus, there's an immediate emotional reward for eating these kinds of foods as well. Like foods that are high in sugar and fat temporarily boost your mood and make you feel better when you're going through a tough time or a stressful situation. This emotional eating, especially of calorie-dense foods, can easily push you into a calorie surplus, slowing down or reversing that fat loss progress. Second is the impact that high cortisol and high stress can have on insulin and insulin resistance. This is another way that stress affects your fat loss, and it's through its impact on insulin, which we have talked about before in the previous video that we just did. I think slightly a little bit about sugar. Now, when cortisol is elevated, it causes your blood sugar levels to increase, so your muscles have more energy available to use to fight or flight. This extra energy will be used if you were again escaping a predator, but it's not useful when you're just dealing with mental and emotional stress. More glucose in the blood leads to higher insulin production to manage that excess glucose and bring it into the cells. Over time, this can contribute to insulin resistance, where your cells become less responsive to insulin. Again, in that video that I did, like the last video we did around sugar, it's kind of like the insulin is knocking on the doors of the cells and they really are having a hard time hearing that who is outside. And it really becomes harder for your body to regulate blood sugar, leading to an increased fat storage along with other chronic health issues. The third piece is going to be disrupted sleep patterns. Stress, it's clearly one of the leading causes of poor sleep, and disrupted sleep can have major impacts on your ability to lose fat. When you're sleep deprived, your body's hunger and fullness hormones, ghrelin and leptin, which I mentioned earlier, become unbalanced as well, making you feel hungrier and less satisfied after eating. Poor sleep also slows down your metabolism, contributing to further increases in cortisol and making you more likely to choose high sugar, high calorie foods for a quick boost of energy. This has actually been shown even in sleep studies. There's a really good book I recommend called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker, who explains exactly how this works through a lot of studies that they've done in different universities across the United States and the world, where they would put people to sleep for 4 hours and compare them to the people that only sleep for 8 hours. And what they found is that the people that only sleep 4 hours tend to have more inclination to eat higher calorie, higher sugary foods. Also, in a study that looked at 149 servicemen in China who were sleep deprived for 24 hours, it found a significant increase in cortisol levels, which ultimately affected their mental health as well. Altogether, these factors can really make it a struggle to reach your fat loss goals. The last one is, and this is the one for the guys that you don't really want to hear, it's muscle loss. High cortisol levels can lead to muscle loss by breaking down muscle tissue for energy when your body is under stress. Less muscle means a slower metabolism, since muscle burns more calories at rest than fat, making it harder also to lose weight or simply maintain a current calorie deficit required for that. Now, this research review, for example, look at the different exercise modes or modalities and their impact on cortisol levels and muscle loss, and found that particularly in elderly adults, high cortisol as a result of intense exercise can lead to muscle loss or decrease in lean mass, which is kind of productive when you think about it, because you exercise to do that, to increase muscle, but then too much is never a good thing. And the last one is going to be impaired digestion. Stress can also really mess with your digestion, either by slowing it down or making things overactive. When you're constantly stressed, you might notice issues like bloating and constipation or even diarrhea, and this makes it even harder for your body to absorb nutrients the way that it should. If your digestion is out of whack, your body will struggle to process food properly, which obviously can lead to a bunch of issues like inflammation and making it harder for you to burn fat. But now that you have an idea of all the ways that stress affects your body and your weight, let's go back to this idea of cortisol face, because that's what you're here for. Essentially, the cortisol face trend is where creators show before and after pictures, like you saw in these 2 clips that I showed at the beginning of the video. Now, often they talked about the various changes that they've made in their life between the photos in order to reduce stress. Now, I'm going to show you what I mean, but let's just watch a bit more of that first video clip so you understand exactly what I am talking about.
I was 19 in those pictures. I was working out like 6 times a week. At that point, when those pictures were taken, I was exercising like really, really heavy lifting 6 days a week and not doing anything else. I was a full-time student. I was babysitting. I was kind of on like a binge restrict cycle with my eating, and I was not taking care of my mental health whatsoever.
So clearly, this person, this creator, was under a lot of stress during the time that she claimed she had, again, that cortisol face. But the question is, was her rounder face really a result of high cortisol? Now, one condition where we do actually see a rounder face with high cortisol, it's when somebody has something known as Cushing's syndrome. This often happens when somebody has a tumor on their pituitary gland. Remember, we talked about the HPA axis before. Or when they're on a glucocorticoid medication, like prednisone, which is often used to treat autoimmune conditions. But Cushing's is pretty rare and do not really have that. Now, the changes you saw in the video, from my perspective, from my opinion, again, nothing against her. I think, who knows, maybe she has that or she had that. But I think they're just simply a result of a couple different factors. First, well, is age, right? The before pictures you saw were taken when that creator was 19. And if you see pictures of me when I was 19, I definitely not look the same that I did when now I'm 36. I feel like I look better now than I did back then. And many people still have that extra kind of baby fat on their face that that naturally rounds out their features. Now, second, and this is the case with most of these Cortisol Face videos that I've come across, she was most likely carrying just some extra weight in general due to her high stress lifestyle, and she even mentioned the binge and restrict cycle that she mentioned. Now, cortisol could have played a role in having some excess fat on her body because of the 5 reasons I mentioned above, but it isn't specifically causing excess weight in her face. It's just simply how weight gain works, that when you gain weight, some of that is going to end up changing the shape of your face a bit. For guys, sometimes it's not necessarily the face, it could be the belly, and you're noticing some roundness in your face. Chances are you don't really have the cortisol face. You could just simply be carrying some extra weight on your body, and it's very possible stress is just simply one factor contributing to that. If you feel like stress is a problem for you, I typically recommend making some changes in 3 key areas: mindset, your nutrition, and your daily habits. Honestly, stress management could probably be a full video on its own, but I'm going to try to keep this brief while giving you some action steps that you can work on right away. First, let's talk about one critical mindset shift that I always explain to my clients. One way that I personally manage stress is with a concept known as the circles of control, or the spheres of control, which differentiates between things in your life that you can control versus those things that you just simply can't. Now, the inner circle includes things within your control, like your thoughts, your actions, how you respond to challenges. Now, everything outside the outer circle are things that you can control or have minimum control over, like other people's reactions, unexpected life events, the weather. By focusing more on what's within your control in that little small circle and worrying less about what's in the outer ones, you can reduce overwhelm and free up mental energy and lower your stress over time. The next factor when it comes down to busting stress is your nutrition habits. Clearly, nutrition plays a massive role in how your body handles stress. As I explained earlier, when you're stressed, your body craves quick energy, which is why it's easy to reach for sugary, high-fat comfort foods. But when you go for these options, you're likely going to spike your blood sugar levels, cause energy crashes, which eventually increases even stress on your body even more, even making you eat more because you get hungrier faster. To avoid this, you need to try to focus on foods that stabilize your energy levels. Maybe things like whole foods, like lean proteins, fiber-rich vegetables, healthy fats. This will keep your blood sugar steady and give your body the nutrients that it needs to handle stress more effectively. And finally, let's talk about daily habits and stress management practice. The first 2 key habits to prioritize when it comes down to stress management are sleep and physical activity. Now, I tend to recommend prioritizing 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night because it's going to allow your body to recover and regulate your hormones more effectively, and physical activity reduces cortisol and releases endorphins, which are often called the feel-good hormones or neurotransmitters, and they can help you boost your mood. Now, once you've got a solid sleep and exercise routine going, I can recommend starting to add in some intentional stress management practice. I'm talking things like breathwork exercises, meditation, journaling, nature walks, anything that makes you feel calmer and more at peace. I know it can seem like these things won't really make much of an impact, which you've got so much on your plate to worry about, but honestly, and trust me when I say this, these small consistent practices can honestly make a massive difference in how your body handles stress, and also how you can be happier. One thing I really recommend here though is doing a bit of an audit when it comes down to stressors in your life. Take a look at the 3 categories above and take some time to consider how your habits look in each one of those areas. Are you spending a lot of time worrying about things that are just simply outside of your control? What does your nutrition look like on a daily basis? How about sleep and exercise? Go through different areas of your life and identify where you need to start being more mindful and intentional about reducing the stress on your body and your mind. Now, before we finish up today's video, let me ask you a question, and I'm going to be super honest in here. Do you ever feel like no matter how many of these videos you watch, you're still stuck in a cycle in your health and you feel like you cannot get out of it? You have the 20 to 30 pounds extra that you have lost and gained multiple times, and it just simply becomes harder and harder and harder every time. I put together a training for you guys, if that's you, that goes a bit more in depth in how dads aren't winning what I like to call the weight war in their 30s and 40s and even 50s unless they're using extreme methods like fasting, intermittent fasting, carnivore diets, and a bunch of different BS things. How this could be maybe different for you using a 3-step formula that I developed over the years. Now, I'm going to drop the link for the free masterclass below so you can go and check it out because I think it's going to be extremely valuable for you. But that brings us to the end of today's video. And even though we've debunked the whole cortisol face trend, using the tips above to support stress management can make a huge difference in your results if you're working to lose weight right now. And if that's your goal, make sure you're hitting subscribe right now to my channel if you really enjoyed this video, because I have so many videos already posted and more coming your way that are going to support you through your weight loss journey every step of the way. Thank you so much for tuning in once again in today's video, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.